Last time on the Bible, the Hebrews got given a bunch of rules and specifications.
It is indeed wonderful that we hath recapped the previous video, and we shall now continue our discussion of the Holy Bible, book number 3, Leviticus. Now let's just, before we get started, remember that this is a secular, left-leaning, progressive, somewhat critical discussion of the Bible, and also we will be looking at the New King James Version. So if you're looking for a specific translation, that is the one that matches this. Let us embark on our journey into
the third book of Moses, called Leviticus. Chapter 1. This book kicks off with God instructing Moses on how he likes his sacrifices. If it's an animal, it's got to be perfect, no blemishes whatsoever. And if it's a bird, it has to be a turtle dove or a young pigeon. And they have specifications on how those innocent animals have to be ritualistically murdered so that their burning flesh can be a sweet aroma to the Lord. Which is chapter 1, verse 17. Chapter 2. This time around, God makes orders about how grain offerings should be done. It's all about having a good powdered grain or properly cooked unleavened breads, etc., etc. So it's all specifications about which breads are allowed, very specific stuff here. Chapter 3. Now it's all about the peace offerings you can bring, and as you know, this is just going to amount to more animals that need to be slaughtered in a ritual sacrifice in varying ways. Well, hey, at least the animals get to be murdered so that humans can feel more powerful, which is great. Chapter 4. It's now time for God to talk about sin. And if you disobey any of his commandments unintentionally, you need to murder a bull for him. And if the sin is both unintentional and hidden, then murder a bull. All the usual things. It has to be an unblemished bull. And there's specific things about where to spray the blood and such. Then it talks about if a leader sins, gotta murder a goat. Which seems like less than a bull in the usual hierarchy of things, which is a bit odd. But you also have to kill a goat for other ordinary people's sins, so at least leaders and normal people get to share in the bloodshed. But hey, you can also kill a female lamb if that's your thing. However, it doesn't seem to have anything against intentionally breaking the commandments of the law, only unintentionally. Or at least by this point in the narrative. Chapter 5. Time for a list of a few sins. Hearing an oath and hiding it. Touching any unclean thing. Swearing, which includes using your mouth to do evil, which I assume would mean things like lying too, but probably not oral sex. That's from a different part of this book. Then it talks about what kind of animal you need to bring to murder, and how to make condolences for your sin to be all good in the hood again. Another interesting thing is that it specifically talks about a sinner becoming aware of their sin. If you're not aware of having sinned, you aren't guilty, I guess, which kind of removes the omnipotence of God from sin, doesn't it? Surely sin is sin, regardless of whether or not you recognize it as sin. But anyway, some sins can be paid off by simply paying people, such as trespassing being repaid by just paying the person whose home you trespassed in. And a trespass against God is also a thing, so just give offerings to say sorry. Chapter 6, it continues with your punishments. If you steal things, you have to replace it, so that's nice. You also have to add some interest to it, so no animal murder, right? Nope, you still have to murder something. It then goes into the specifications of how to do the burnt grain and sin offerings. How to murder the animal, what to do with the offerings, etc., etc. Chapter 7. This just continues with what exactly to do with these offerings, like burning entrails, sprinkling blood, eating the offerings, and unleavened bread stuff. It then goes into trespass and peace offerings, just continues ever on and on with stuff we've already heard, but this book is essentially a rule book, so very little will likely happen. It then reinforces the fact that the blood and fat mustn't be eaten, and that the priests must only eat certain parts. Although, about a paragraph later, it says that Aaron and his children, who are priests, need to eat certain fat. So, alright then. Now a bit of discussion time here. Certain parts of the sacrifices are meant to be eaten by the priests, and while this may be seen as a way of eating for God, or something similar, you can also see it another way. Priests don't need to do any work for the society they live in, and are instead provided for by the people bringing them constant sacrifices that they can eat and adorn themselves with. So, is this just setting up a priest class of people who, according to God, have to be provided for without doing something like, toiling the field, as was supposedly the punishment of all men after Adam and Eve left Eden? Or do the rules change because these specific people have been designated as priests? Do they get special treatment? It's maybe something worth interrogating. But anyway, let's move on. Chapter 8. God directs Moses to prepare Aaron and his sons for the priesthood, and puts on all their awesome clothes, like a special tunic and breastplate. Then they murder an animal, because of course they do. They pretty much burn the whole thing, and then murder another animal and put its blood all over the priests. Then they sprinkle some anointing oil on the new priests and have them sit around for a while so they can become priests. So they do all that. And now we have priests, the first priests of the Lord. Chapter 9. Now it's time to do all those offerings. And so they did them all, and that resulted in the massacre of many animals. But at least God blessed the priests and the people, and God shows off some of his magic firepower. And then it says, when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. Chapter 9, verse 24. Now that's obviously meant to mean that they dropped to their knees and lowered their heads in reverence to the Lord's power, but it kind of sounded like they smashed their faces against the ground, so it's fun. Chapter 10. 2 sons of Aaron have the audacity to try and light a fire in the Lord's presence that he had not ordered. So he killed them both. Then Moses has to send some other people in to remove the bodies, and they're kind of scared. But he tells them not to be because they are under the Lord's protection, unlike the corpses. But God tells them that if they come to him drunk, he's going to kill you. Then it just goes into how to eat offerings. The fact that God just murdered a few of their people doesn't seem to faze them much. Then Moses gets a bit angry about one particular offering that wasn't eaten, but the situation gets resolved quickly and everyone moves on with their lives. So that's good at least. Chapter 11. Now it's time for clean and unclean foods. If it has a cloven hoof and it chews the cud, it's good. If it doesn't do both, then no eat. You can all eat fish though, provided the fish has fins and scales. If it doesn't, then it's a no-no, so no shellfish or anything like that. Then it says that essentially all birds of prey and carrion birds must not be eaten. Then it talks about certain insects that can be eaten. Basically, if they fly and walk on all fours, although I assume they meant all sixes there, they cannot be eaten. There are certain ones you can eat though, like crickets and locusts. Then it goes into a bunch of unclean animals, things that creep, things that eat carcasses, the fun stuff. Now we need to pause here quickly and ask the question, why are these things no-nos? Is it because they're special in some way? Or is it maybe because these creatures happen to be the ones that, if they aren't cooked properly, will poison you? Also somewhat just bad to eat, like carnivores and carrion birds. So are these creatures off limits because they make you sick when you eat them, and ancient people needed a reason to make them off limits? Or are they actually abominations, as they are so often called in this book? Who could possibly figure out such a quandary? Chapter 12. So this is a fun one for the ladies. If you give birth, you are unclean for 7 days, and then your baby's got to get the chop on the 8th. So if you've had a baby, and have done what females are biologically able to do, then you are unclean and you shouldn't be stepping into any holy places. This is a great way to treat someone who's just brought life into the world. This book truly does love woman. Oh, and you also need to do 33 days of purification and murder an animal. So, cool. Chapter 13. Now it's time for leprosy. If you have leprosy, you're also unclean. But at least they have a system. Check in with a priest and show off your skin issues, and then you're unclean for 7 days. But if that spot is gone after 7 days, then you're clean again. If not, well, then you'd better isolate. live away from others, and perhaps die alone. It then goes into quite a bit of detail about various skin infections that need to be examined. It's almost as if this was a way to do rudimentary medical care and public health. I mean, you kind of need to figure out how to stop a leprosy epidemic from breaking out. But all things need to be explained in religious rather than secular terms, so here it is. The same goes for the clothes of people with leprosy. They need to be checked and then deemed clean or unclean, and then responded to accordingly. Chapter 14. This chapter goes into how to help a leper, which is nice. It's all about treating them. It involves both cleaning and murdering animals. They also need to clean out leprous houses. This is actually some good stuff, but it doesn't exactly apply to the modern day. We don't have the same medical concerns because we're no longer backward savages who can only clean and isolate our sick. We have actual medicine, but such a thing wasn't really a thing in Bible times. Which is weird, isn't it? Surely God would have told them about antibiotics or something. They are his chosen people, so surely he'd give them some medical knowledge. But this is not the case, so let's move on. Chapter 15. This chapter goes into bodily discharges, and that they are unclean. They clearly didn't understand things like normal vaginal discharge, but that's getting too sciencey for this book, so let's continue. It now talks about semen, fun times. You're unclean if you do that. And if you have a period, you're also unclean. So semen and period blood are icky, unclean things. Chapter 16. Moses has to tell Aaron that the whole God killing your kids thing was because they came into the tabernacle when they weren't supposed to. No apologies, though. Then Aaron had to bring animal sacrifices as his apology, which seems a bit mean, but this is Old Testament God, remember? And Aaron has to kill a lot of animals for God, although at least one animal sacrifice doesn't involve killing, and that animal is instead released into the wild after he confesses to it. Some goat talking happening here, so that's fun. Then Aaron has to do some cleaning and stuff, and a new ritual is born. Just seems to be a priestly one though, so all good. Chapter 17. It then goes into the rules about bringing offerings to God, because you don't want to get cut off from your people forever, so don't screw up your sacrifices. Also, if an animal dies naturally, you're kind of unclean for eating them, unless you do some physical cleaning. So at least we kind of know by now that being unclean is kind of just a matter of then getting yourself physically cleaned up, which is nice. Chapter 18. Sex. This is the chapter all about sexual morality. So it talks about not uncovering nakedness of certain people, like if they're related to you by blood or by law. So no family relations of that variety are allowed. Then it goes on to say that women cannot be mated with if they are undergoing their customary impurity, which is chapter 18, verse 19. So I guess this means no period sex. Then it says no to banging your neighbor's wife, although it doesn't say no to banging your neighbor's husband, but I guess woman can't be the dominant party in the setup. No banging men if you are a man. Nothing about girl on girl though, so all the lesbians get a free pass on this one. The misogyny of the Bible at least means woman get with woman. And of course, no banging animals or being banged by animals. None of that. So don't be a naughty sex person. It doesn't mention BDSM or monogamy though, so perhaps multiple partners is all fine in the Bible. Of course, that would only be a man with multiple wives and not the other way around. It also doesn't mention age. So maybe there's no explicit age of consent in the Bible. So that's not an issue at all. There's also nothing about serial monogamy. It doesn't say you can only have sex with that one person forever, so it's weird how people have skewed the Bible's message to say that polyamory is bad. Maybe it'll be discussed later in this book. Chapter 19. It then decides to reiterate some things like keeping the Sabbath, no false gods, no lying, no cheating your neighbor, But there's an interesting couple of verses here, and I'm going to just tell you the whole thing, because it's rather interesting. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard, You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am your Lord and God. That is chapter 19, verses 9 to 10. Wow! Actual charity in the Old Testament too. But let's not get too excited. What else does this chapter have to say for itself? It then just goes back to saying that you shouldn't be a gossip, don't hate your brother, your sister is fine though, don't let livestock breed with other livestock of another species, don't cross seeds in your fields, and of course the infamous one, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. It's chapter 19, verse 19. Then it says don't have sex with people who are betrothed to other men, so no cheating. And then we have some fun ones. You shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. Chapter 19, verses 27 to 28. And listen, I've shaved my head, I've trimmed my beard, I have 3 tattoos at present, and maybe they'll do an autopsy on me after I die. Well, I'm going to hell, I guess. Okay, there's even more. Don't prostitute your daughter. Don't practice magic. Get up before old people in the morning to worship God. Don't mistreat strangers. And you should be honest in all matters of business and justice. Wow, I'm guessing lots of Christians follow these teachings. Chapter 20. This just goes into the various punishments you'll face if you commit any of the aforementioned sins. Various things to do with being killed or ostracized from society. Chapter 21. It then goes into how the priests should conduct themselves, and it's pretty much the same stuff with a few restrictions on things like marriage. And here's something interesting. You gotta marry a virgin of your own people, but this only applies to priests. Not all people. Rather interesting, isn't it? Where's all the monogamy the Bible supposedly supports? Chapter 22. God pretty much says that all these rules are going to last forever, and that the descendants of Aaron must be followed forever, and that the unclean versus clean traditions must be upheld, such as the whole don't touch semen thing. It makes you unclean. Then it just goes into which offerings will and won't be accepted, like no bruised fruit and stuff like that. It's all got to be perfect. Chapter 23. This chapter also goes into some feasts, so that's a bit less heavy and depressing. It goes into the rituals around the Sabbath, the Passover, the First Fruits feasts, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Atonement, and the Feast of the Tabernacles. These are all just specifications on all the feasts, when they are, and all that jazz. It's not really all that important to know the specifics, though. I mean, unless you plan on practicing them, I guess. Chapter 24. Now it goes into some other fun things, like how to look after the tabernacle lamps, and how to make the bread of the tabernacle. And then, inexplicably, in this same chapter, it goes into the penalty for blasphemy. You stone the person to death. Then it has the famous line, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, as he has caused disfigurement of a man, so shall it be done to him. It's chapter 24, verse 20. Oh, and similar stuff for animals. Like, if you kill an animal, you have to give the person a new animal. This was actually mentioned already in, like, Exodus. But I guess repetition is the name of the game. Chapter 25. It just reinforces that the Sabbath is a holy day. Okay, cool. Then it talks about when to celebrate the year of Jubilee. And on this year, which is every 49 years, you can relieve people of debts and such. So just a nice year every few decades. And then it says something real fun for modern capitalism. The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. Chapter 25, verse 23. And this just goes into property and houses and stuff. It's almost as if this book was created as a way of creating a rudimentary law system or something with rules and such. Wow! And another fun one. If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him. Chapter 25, verse 35. Interesting how the Bible is really interested in helping the poor, yet contemporary Christians often all but spit on the poor. I think there's some cognitive dissonance here. Then it goes into slavery. So it seems someone can sell themselves into slavery for a debt, so indentured servitude, but they must be released on the year of Jubilee. But you can buy slaves from other lands. You can even inherit slaves, and they shall be your permanent slaves. Chapter 25, verse 46. And if outsiders enslave any Hebrews around you, then you can free them. Now it's also probably worth noting that all of this kind of applies to the Hebrews and not necessarily to other people. So all us non-Hebrews are shit out of luck, really. Oh well, no debt forgiveness. Chapter 26. Okay, so it just goes into some more commandment stuff, and also some things God promises, like no wars in your land, no evil beasts, you'll all multiply, and then it says that if you disobey, he'll bring his wrath down upon you. And he goes pretty heavy into how he'll make you suffer. Chapter 27, this just goes into how to redeem property and stuff, which seems a bit anticlimactic for the last chapter in Leviticus. But alas, it is! And the specifications aren't important, but it goes into a lot of detail about how to repay this stuff. So that's good for anyone who desperately needs to know how to negotiate biblical traditions in the modern day.
And that is it. The third book of the Old Testament, Leviticus. And next will be Numbers. Whenever that happens to be. But until next time, my children, read with a critical eye. Ciao.